As a quick overview, in the main source tree, this is just a branch of the Drizzle source. You'll see there's a plugin directory, um, and in the plugin directory, each directory that is underneath that essentially holds. Well, it holds. So we're working on terminology here. It actually holds a plugin
bundle
library.
Because a bundle library can implement more than one plugin.
Yes. So no. Yeah. So there's a plugin library. A plugin library may implement one or more plugins.
Kind of the canonical example would be NODB, since
NODB,
it implements both a storage engine
and a whole bunch of information schema plugins.
Mm-hmm.
Most of these wind up being a single type, but like this memcached functions plugin here implements like 17 different UDFs, but it's one plugin. It's the code that represents one library of things. So as a real sort of simple example, I wrote this morning. It only took about half an hour, so just to show that it's not a terribly long process. An error message plugin that will log your server error messages to Twitter.
This will not go in mainline.
This will not get merged into the mainline. This is not a good idea. I do not recommend anybody logging their error messages to Twitter. I'm sure it's a violation of their terms of service. Somehow. Either that or it would cause them to crash again. But this is all of 2 files. This is almost like a Hello World. We have a Hello World plugin actually, but it's a UDF, and the UDFs are a little weird anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So this is slightly hopefully easier to follow.
Drizzle plugins.
Yeah. So the sort of starting entry point for all of this, all directories of code containing files implementing plugins are pretty much they have to have a plugin.ini file. If you've ever done MySQL plugin development, this is what replaced MySQL's plug.in file.
That was a piece of shit.
Yeah, that was not good. This is just an ini format file. It has. You may have noticed, Mark, we have removed the name thing, as Robert Collins pointed out. That's duplicated data, because actually you already know the name of it because you're in the directory that's named what that name would be. So anyway. A title and description. I can't give you a really good reason why we have both a title and a description.
It's for hysterical reasons.
It's really for hysterical reasons. I've included this so if you happen to have more than one source file that's implementing this, like you've been nice and you've implemented 7 UDFs and you've put each one of them in their own C file rather than just one big long C file, just list them space separated. If you have one and only one source file and it is named the same as the directory, which is the same as the name of the plugin library, you can omit that, as the plugin registration system will figure out that that is probably your source file and will just compile it for you. But I went ahead and put it in there so I can point it out.
Why would you even bother? Why don't you just compile all the files in the directory? I mean,
because
there are instances where you would put a C file that you wouldn't want.
The test.
Oh yes.
Test train one.
I'll give you a really
No, I
specific.
suspect that would be true, but subdirectories.
So in InnoBase,
NODB is always.
NODB is sort of always the definition for why we do anything complicated. In its plugin.ini file, you will notice that we have 4 files listed as sources.
The rest are actually dependent.
The rest are actually, you'll see here in this libs argument, plugin InnoBase, lib InnoBase. There is an entire other, so in any plugin, and this is sort of slightly more advanced than the simple case, you can drop in a plugin.am, which is an automake file, and a plugin.ac file in the directory, and the plugin registration system will know to suck those into the build system. So the plugin.am file for InnoBase in ours builds all of the rest of the NODB stuff as a library, partially because they can't handle our warnings, and so I have to turn off warnings for the bulk of the NODB code, because
you expanded that really fast. Drizzle's build system promotes all compile warnings to errors.
Yeah.
And we have as many warning flags on as we can get away with.
Yeah.
So it's turned into a real challenge. Whenever we pull in someone else's software, they are not as anal about it as we are.
Yeah.
And so we have found numerous both warnings and bugs in other people's software and system header libraries, system headers, because
Yeah.
no
And
one ever said W error in their compiler.
Yeah. And also, you know, I'm not working for Oracle yet, so I guess I can still say bad things about them. They aren't really quick on taking up patches, so I'm not really going to spend all my time cleaning up their warnings because I'm pretty sure they're not going to take the patch. So, anyway, so yeah, so there are times when you'll have files. What's up?
Good answer.
Yeah. So there are times, yeah, when you have files in there that you wouldn't necessarily want to compile. So there. In this, I would like to point out this is not the right way to do this. But if you need to add CPP flags or CXX flags or LD flags to build your thing, you can indicate them here. In this case, I've decided to use Twitter glib basically just so that we don't have to actually learn anything about writing Twitter messages in this context. Just hard coding these in here is absolutely and always the wrong way, and I would never accept this patch into the mainline. But I also didn't want this to be an exercise on teaching everybody how to write autoconf tests.
That would be a different class.
That would be a different class. But what you would really want to do is write an autoconf test that finds Twitter glib and makes probably a variable called, you know, whatever, Twitter glib C flags or something, and then reference that here. But any variables that you created by autoconf, you can reference here. So I could, you know, I can add this, and that will include the zlib C flags as found by autoconf and stuff. So that we could talk for literally hours about the various automake and autoconf related things that go into the building of plugins. Slightly out of scope of a 45-minute chat. But I'm always happy to chat. Oh, well, happy maybe isn't the right word. There's also various flags that I need to document somewhere that you can stick in here, load by default. If you have written terrible code, you can put in static equals yes.
You're unlikely to get that one merged.
And it won't build it as a dynamic SO that it then DL opens. It will build it as statically linked stuff, which is really the only reason to do that is that the code is unclean and has static global class members that the initialization order gets screwed up in. So anyway, this is the basic gist of this file. It's basically just, you know, key value sort of things. And you saw in the InnoBase one, spaces include carriage returns, so I can, you know, do, you know, I can split that up and I don't have to do backslashes for returns or whatever. It's a nice parser. It's just the standard Python ini config parser thing. So it requires this plugin header, and it must be called plugin. I'm using somebody else's parser, so that's just the way that it works. So then in this case, it's a single file of stuff. All plugins in Drizzle are instances of classes, or they're subclasses of. They are instances of subclasses of classes. You know, whatever.
Must they be written in C++?
Yes,
Right.
It must be written in C++. At some point, someone is more than welcome to write a C plugin loader plugin. No reason why not. But we are not providing any C compatibility stuff because you're generating classes. Yeah.
In part, one of the goals of Drizzle was to stop writing things in C++.
Yeah. So anyway, so we've got some headers. I literally actually took error message _ standard error, which is the standard error message logging plugin, and copied it and modified it, which is, I always find, a really great way to start writing plugins, is to take somebody else's code and just hack on it. So you can thank Mark for the basis of this file. So there's some most of the time you probably just want to include Drizzle D server includes.
You really don't, you need the first and third include there all the time. And for the.
Well, actually, yeah. You may or may not need the get text. I believe we are using
or using underscore type. Yep.
Yeah,
If
so
you
we
ever
do.
say that, and you really always should,
Yeah, but
then you
we'll
need getX.
come back to. So, so you'll notice the first bit here is that we're going to write a class, error message Twitter, is a subclass of Drizzle plugin error message, which amazingly enough is the error message plugin type. Woo! Go figure. If you want to see what that is in the Drizzle, so off of the root of the source tree in Drizzle plugin is where all of the classes describing plugin types are. So in this case, it'd be error message.h, because we have this wonderful thing where classes are camel cased, but our file names describing them are underscore based re-representations of that name. So error, capital E error, capital M message is going to always translate to all lowercase error underscore message in the file. Don't ask me. You'll notice this is a pretty small class. It has one virtual method that you are expected to, that you are required to implement. And everything else is just sort of, it's got a single constructor that takes a name argument. All of the plugins will have a constructor that takes a name argument, and the error message thing there. And then there's some static, and we'll look at these in a minute. These static things you don't really have to worry about. Those are the server-side interface for how the server is going to call into types of the plugin that have been provided. So in this case, there's one and only one method that we actually have to implement this plugin type properly, which makes it a sort of a good example. So we'll do this. We make a, for standard C++y stuff, we'll make a constructor here that calls the base class constructor and passes it I gave it a poor name. We'll call this, C++ doesn't actually have a way to introspect a string of the name of the class that you're dealing with, so we sort of have to do this for it, which is why we're passing in a name argument. Because at some point when you're doing an information schema lookup of what plugins are loaded, you'd like to know what they're called. Most likely that this is this plugin. So anyway, that's that name. You could call it anything. It's not. It's really just for later.
It will be confusing if you don't.
It'll be confusing if you don't call it the same thing. But there's nothing physically that will break if you decide to call this ed. You probably won't get that merged, but whatever. We've got a Twitter client pointer that is a private member of the class, and we initialize that to null because we do. Probably could have just initialized that to the return code of, but anyway, doesn't matter. In the constructor of the class, we make a new Twitter client instance and pass it in a username and a password, which we'll look at in a second too. When the destructor destructs the client instance, and then we get down here to the bulk of the plugin, which is that one virtual method that we had to override, error message. We don't use these first two parameters from the thing, the session and the priority aren't used in this case.
Now here's a gotcha. Because we've turned on all warnings and converted all warnings to errors, having an unused parameter into a function or method call triggers a warning.
Yeah.
So we can't actually put the name of
So
the
if I did
parameter there
this,
if you don't use it.
It would fail. There's a couple different ways you can do that to get rid of this. You can do this. Not to go too far into the
compiler specific.
You can do that. That's actually not recognized by Sun Studio and generates its own warning in Sun Studio. And
special.
you can also do this.
Which is my favorite for a while. That causes an error in some other compiler.
Well, the biggest issue that I found with that is that doesn't cause a problem if you decide later on that you're going to do, whatever down here. This having it not exist up here sort of prevents you from having it marked as unused and then using it, which is more confusing. Same thing with attribute unused. You can mark it attribute unused, use it in the thing, and it still is everything okay. So I've actually become really a big fan of just removing it from the arg list, because then it's physically nothing's going to compile because you ain't got a name of anything there. If you want to use it, name it, and then you can use it. And anyway, long rambling thing about C++. It's not really about plugins, but that's the reason that those are missing from the argument list in this case. And then essentially we're just we're constructing a message. We're writing a quick hashtag into it because it's Drizzle or it's Twitter, and that's what we do. Probably should go at the end. And then we just print the incoming error message into that, and then send it to a call Twitter client add status, and that writes the message buffer out. This code actually also probably won't work because this is using glib and requires a gmain loop to be running somewhere, but I didn't want 50 curl calls in the example.
Only takes one.
What's that?
Only takes one.
You gotta set up curl.
Well, yeah.
Does that Twitter client add status actually parse the different return codes that come back from Twitter, or is it just kind of like, hey, did I get a
This
500?
particular library actually is asynchronous, which is the reason you gotta have a Twitter main loop. So it's just gonna fire that off, and then you can register a callback with the library to handle return codes if you want to. But you know, logically, logically that would happen. So that's our class. That's our error message Twitter class. That's all you need to do to write a. So obviously, if you're actually going to write an error message handling class, writing one that did something more sensible than sending the error messages to Twitter would probably be something that would be more interesting.
There are right now three built. There are three error message plugins that ship.
Nope, those are the logging plugins. There are two different. There are error message plugins and there are logging plugins.
So the error message ones, there's write to stand error. There's only one I thought I had two. One to write to stand error and one to write to syslog.
No, you've got a logging plugin that logs to syslog, logs to Gearman, and logs to standard error.
I thought I had an error message when I wrote to syslog.
Nope. So if anybody wants to write an error message plugin that logs error messages to syslog,
I may do that on the train home.
There you go.
I thought I written that.
So then we get down to code which actually involves registering because the plugin, that's great, it's a plugin class, but you've got to tell Drizzle now, hey, I've got this plugin and you should use it for something. So down here we make a class scoped pointer to an instance of an error message Twitter. In general, another little C++ note, this will not be allowed. Can't do that. Because this is going to be DL opened and C++ is not guaranteed to run constructors on things, so you can wind up with a non-thing. So we'll new it down here so that we actually know when it's going to run and actually know that the constructor gets run, just in case anybody's wondering why I'm bothering to do a new on this. So the init call gets called, so when Drizzle starts up, it goes through a sequence of initialization. And one of the things that it does is all of the plugin libraries that it has, and we'll see where those get registered. It's basically just doing everything in reverse order. All the plugin libraries that it knows about have an initialization method associated with them, and it runs all of those. Yay! Go figure. And it passes in a reference to the plugin registry object. So what you get in here is you create. And the memory of this is owned by the plugins own their own memory, essentially. So the plugin creates a new instance of, the plugin library creates a new instance of this plugin, and then it adds it to the registry, to the plugin registry inside of Drizzle. If in the case, say we had written 17 UDFs that were also related to this, we could just do multiple calls to registry add here. You know, and add as many instances of things as we want to add, you know, whatever it is that we want to do there, we can add stuff ad nauseum. It's a proactive thing as far as that goes, which is where I was saying earlier, if somebody wants to write a C plugin, loader plugin, one of the reasons that we have things working in this direction is so that you can have a plugin type whose job is to proxy and add plugins. Specifically, I was thinking for things like Java or Python, so that you can have one Python loader plugin that reads all the Python stuff and then registers, in a loop as many plugins as it needs to do, rather than needing to know statically at compile time what plugins exist. So those are that. So you add that, and then later on, there's also a corresponding dinit call.
It's called when Drizzle shuts down.
That gets called on shutdown. And here we will tell the registry to remove the handler that we added earlier, and we will also delete it because we like to deallocate memory that we've allocated.
So
it's typically a good idea.
Another difference between Drizzle and MySQL is that MySQL, in theory, can load and unload plugins dynamically. This has been a nightmare because it causes there's one that results in having one mutex that every plugin call has to run through, so it's a very hot mutex. Drizzle can only load and unload plugins at startup and shutdown.
Yeah.
For before we go multi-threaded, we load all of the plugins that we're going to load, and then we go multi-threaded. So
On shutdown, after we kill all of our threads, we unload our plugins.
yeah.
So in your plugin.ino where you had load as default, what exactly does that mean?
What that means, actually, what that causes to happen.
Sorry to
No, it's a good question. So what that causes is this file that gets created here has two different lists. Plugin built-in list, which gets a list of every plugin that has static equals yes listed, because there's some of these that I can't turn into dynamic plugins, like my ISAM. And you'll notice that we have this built-in MySam plugin referenced here. There's another chunk of code that will load all of the built-in statically compiled plugins. And then you get this defined here, which is the default list of plugins to load. If you don't specify anything on the command line or in a configuration file of
so to
plugins
both
that you want.
compile into the binary and auto load, or without a with plugin option when you start Drizzle D.
Right. No. So this is just if you don't give it a plugin load configuration variable, it will load this list of plugins, which is generated from all the plugins that have load by default on. There's now I've added a second startup option to Drizzle. So there's plugin load, which you give a comma separated list of plugin names, and it will load that list and only that list at startup. There's also now plugin add, which will load a plugin in addition to the default plugin list. So there will be a default list, and you can also say, hey, and I'd also like to load this plugin, and I don't even know what all the default plugins are, and I don't want to know what all the default plugins are. So you'll get that. So load by default essentially just injects something into this list, which will be iterated. You also notice anybody that's done MySQL.
You just for
yeah.
Consistency, you also have a remove plugin, so you say all the default ones except this one?
No, but it should. Thank you. Yes, I should add that. Or like accept plugin or plugin remove, or that would be also good. Is I like that list. Except I'm tired of this one plugin. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good call. I will add that. So that's what that does.
I think you should rename Hello World. You should call it like Hello Monty. You know, it's like Hello Dolly type thing. You've got to put some personalization in there.
Should probably Hello Oracle.
Can you define languages, like stored procedure languages, as a plugin? Like, how does that work? I've heard you guys have some kind of Lua plugin or something.
I've got some code where so the next step as far as that goes, I've got a tree that's actually bit rotted a little bit that I need to resuscitate. But the thought there is rather than so the first element that would be is going to be the ability, the one that would be useful would be like probably UDFs to be able to do another language. But essentially, the plan there is to make what I was talking about earlier a plugin loader plugin. So I'll make a Python plugin loader plugin.
And what do you mean by Python plugin? I guess I'm starting to get confused by all the overloaded mutants.
Yeah, I know the word plugin is ludicrously overloaded.
Yeah.
So what I mean is I'll write a plugin library, I guess, which what it would do is allow you to write any of the plugin types in another language, right? So if you wanted to write an error message plugin in Lua or Python, essentially what I would do is I'd have like in here in the plugin dir, right? I'd have I could have like a So if I was in here, I'd have like a Python plugin library, right? And all that plugin library would know how to do is read through a whole bunch of Python code that you've written in Python and know how to register classes that you've written that would be subclasses of a type that I provide in the Python library.
Basically,
And it would know how to register those into the server at startup time.
scan down a directory of .py files,
Yeah.
introspect them, look for ones that had a particular.
So you're gonna write code that introspects every language that you wanna be able to.
I will have to write a plugin for each language.
See, if you
So I
just
wanna
allow me to embed parrot in there, then you can just piggyback on all the
You are
languages that-
totally allowed to write a plugin that embeds Parrot.
That's
But I-
That loads all parrot languages.
No, because the end user can install whatever languages they want.
Right.
That use
Please,
parrot.
please write that plugin.
Yeah.
Give me your API docs.
This is the API.
They're right here. You just branched them.
You can write your own API docs. You've got freedom to like fork it, and if it doesn't
Yeah.
regress the system, then it gets implemented. Yeah.
So,
So yeah, I guess what is the equivalent documentation for like starting? A PL language in Postgres is what what I'm coming from. So where would I find the docs for creating the equivalent of a new PL language?
yeah. Well, so we don't have stored procedures at all.
Sure.
So essentially,
So I'm trying to
yeah.
force it into this plugin.
Yeah. So essentially, just it would be so in what the thing that I was pointing out earlier. This.
Because I think
Drizzle plugin.
you listed which which libraries to link in, and we have a library that we can link in. With that.
Yeah. Well, so it's essentially you'll have to write some code
So I'm
that
gonna-
that knows how to provide, because from a language that's targeting parrot perspective, that language is going to need to be able to, whatever that is in parrot or wherever, is going to be able to need to create an instance of a query cache object or an error message object, right?
Sure.
So each one of these plugin types in here, you have to do some code, and I know how to do this for Python and a couple of other languages directly, but you want to be able to have somebody make a Python object which is a subclass eventually of this C object or the C class, and then the register call, the register plugins call. So you need there will need to be some hook language. So it's sort of be like writing bindings to a library, just sort of in a weird reverse order. But you'll need those library bindings because the plugin itself has to be able to call. It's got to be able to deal with pointers to memory that it gets from the server and stuff like that. So it'll be exciting. But I'm in favor of that plan. I want you to do that. So we have an init and dnet thing. I'm going to skip to the bottom of the file real quick. All of the plugins, all plugin libraries have one of these. I refer to this as a manifest, mainly because that's the name of the data type that is the struct is.
This is actually a piece of magic C macros that expand this out into ultimately a struct definition of a particular magic variable name.
Yeah. So basically you'll have a thing that's wrapped in Drizzle declare plugin and Drizzle declare plugin end. It has several things. Error message Twitter here does nothing other than show up in information schema as so we've got two tables in our information schema now. There's information schema plugin modules and information schema modules and information schema plugins. Each one of these represents a module, because a module may have one or more plugins, right? And so different things that you may want to know as you're figuring out what's going on is what plugins are loaded, but also what plugin libraries should that come from. So anyway, so this is the name that'll show up in that modules table. This is a string version. It can be anything. It's really sort of meaningless other than for reporting. The name of the person who wrote it, a description of this. License we've got defines for GPL and BSD and other.
Also, different plugins may have different licenses.
Yeah.
Cool.
This is something we inherited from MySQL.
Yeah.
Something to do with people who think this sort of stuff is important.
Yeah. So init and dinit those are essentially function pointers to. You'll notice that we have a function called init, a function called dinit. We reference them down here to tell it what's the initialization function to call when we need to initialize this plugin library, and what's the deinitialization. If this plugin provided any status variables, this would be a list of those. And we do actually have 2 system variables, which are settable. If you look up here at the top, we've got a char star for the username and one for the password that we're going to get. You'll notice that in the constructor here, we're using the values of those to do our login, and then this ugly magic down here, Drizzle sysvar string, where we're handing it a reference to that variable that we've got in the file, and we're associating that with a plugin with a variable that in this case to the system will be called error message underscore Twitter underscore user will be the name of the variable. So if you want
it takes the plugin name and prepends it to the first parameter of sysvar string.
Right. So so that will be the name of the plugin in this context, or that will be the name of this variable. So if you were starting up Drizzle in the configuration file or on the command line, you'd be like dash, error message Twitter user equals blah and password, and then I've got default, I've got a default username, Twitter username, and a default password, which should probably just default to null, but and I should probably do more error checking, blah blah blah. But this will hook in, so it allows Drizzle to configure what the username and password of your Twitter account are. Because we don't want all of the people who install this plugin on all of their Drizzle installations to all be logging to the same Twitter account, because that would be even worse than this idea already is. So anyway, so then you make a list of these things, and then so that we called system variables, and then you'll notice that we just passed that system variables list into this manifest. So that it knows where to get those. I keep wanting to rip out this entire variable system and replace it with something. I just haven't gotten to it yet. Sorry.
It's hung up on.
It's hung up on many things. Most of them having to do with time.
The bookmarks thing.
No, bookmarks is not interesting or relevant or hard. It's just there. Bookmarks is a implementation detail of this system. It will go away when this system is replaced. But at least in my opinion. But it's just, yeah. Anyway,
this is once again a under the hood a really nasty piece of C preprocessor macros, expanding macros.
But you notice we haven't really touched how this works very much, as the name of the struct of things that you're doing here is still even got MySQL in the name of it. So that's how much we've touched this.
When you build your own, you were invited to cargo cult it. Don't try to figure out how it works.
Yeah. This is definitely a cut and paste out of somebody else's plugin situation when you want to just add variables. The same thing with status variables. If there's a status variable thing is going to register, just look at one of the other plugins and what it's doing is really the best way to hook into that. So that's it. I literally did make this work and compile it. It does compile, I promise. I have not tested it to actually run it because I really don't actually want to spam Twitter with a whole bunch of error messages.
But you're not going to spam it. You're testing it. You don't even come there.
You know somebody hooked a toilet up to Twitter, right? I mean, this would be a pretty good idea in comparison.
That's a good point.
So what is the Twitter library that you actually used?
This one is I did apt cache search Twitter library. And what I found was there were 2 libmojito dev and libtwitter glib dev that I could get installed. And libmojito dev seems to want me to do a whole bunch of random stuff, and it has really bad docs. And this one I could do 2 calls, so I just used that. It's a little bit heavy, I think, because it requires me to have all of these things.
Oh, XML parsing. Yeah.
Right. Glib soup, glib JSON, blah 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 blah. So
it seems unnecessary because it's using the XML REST API when it could just use JSON one.
So totally overblown, but
We didn't want to spend.
Describing
curl.
I understand that.
Yeah, I don't think what I can't believe is there's not a simple Twitter API library. I mean, I know you can do it with curl and it's a REST API or whatever, but Twitter is so ubiquitous. I'm surprised
In
that
what
no one,
language?
in C. There's plenty in all of the languages that aren't C.
There are different old languages ones, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But in C, you just use libcurl. I mean,
Yeah.
it is
In Python, you just use libcurl. I'm just saying, it surprises me that no one has. It's a thing that people do, right? And so I'm surprised there isn't a stupid, simple wrapper library that just posts tweets. It's just not there. Everybody that's doing this wants to make one that writes a library to every social networking site that exists, and also bakes toast, and that's great. It just because there's a library for every blessed other thing in the world. I'm not saying that we need one. Just it surprises me that there isn't one. In all honesty. So that's the basics of.
so that's how you found that, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I ran a little bit long on that. So to look at the error message plugin, it's the plugin point inside of. So if you wanted to add a new plugin type inside of Drizzle itself, just to look at this, basically you're gonna add a class that subclasses plugin. Most likely you'll stick it in the drizzled plugin namespace. It's actually subclassing drizzled plugin because it wants to do that. I've got these private constructors here basically just because we're not using them, and so it's a good idea to stick those there so that the compiler does not generate them, since we're not going to use them. We've got like I said, we need to. The plugin itself takes takes the name of the plugin type. In this case, it's an error message plugin because you want to also be able to show in information schema plugins. I keep saying that. Let me show you what I'm talking about. In case you haven't seen this plugin of,
that is a neat trick.
this is the best thing in the world. And you'll see I've got a glib. That's so it has loaded my my Twitter error message thing. But I'm not running a loop. I didn't initialize glib, so that's the reason I'm getting those glib errors there. But I am shit.
In the background, that did you?
That didn't do what I wanted it to do. Oh well.
Fire up the right your main line drizzle.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, my plugin sort of works this. I'm built in there. Where do I have a build? Where do I have a build that actually works? It's not going to be there. It's not going to be there. Which version?
Oopsie.
Oopsie probably. No, obviously not built.
You do not actually have a build drizzle.
And I'm noticing it takes a little bit of time to build Drizzle.
Better than MySQL.
Does make-j work? I didn't want
Yes.
to try it and then make it
Yes.
a
Yes.
fucking
It totally works.
Being Sun people and having access to machines with large number of cores, each of which are very slow, you're damn sure we made sure
good.
that
I'm
make-j
glad.
works.
I'm glad.
It's really kind of fun to have a machine where you can say make-j 128.
Wow.
Okay, so I've started Drizzle with the console thing done. So if I select star from modules, you'll see we've got module types here. So there's the error message standard error module. So if I do select star from plugins, you'll see that we have all of these things. So all of these memcached things are functions. The error message standard error plugin is an error message. So that error message string right there, capital E, capital M, that's coming directly from here. This argument. So that's where you're setting for the information schema output that's running plugins what type of plug in any subclass of this will be. So we're not giving the subclasses any of their ability to override this because that's not what you want in that plugin class. But you still do need a name, and this name is the name that's going to show up here, right? So that's the reason that you want that as an argument from the plugin in the constructor. Since this thing is going to be subclassed, yeah, it darn well wants a virtual destructor, or you're all evil. Make virtual methods. They can either be pure virtual, as this one is, which makes them required, or you can have default implementations of them if it's a more complicated plugin type, like a storage engine. And then every plugin type is required to have a static method called add plugin that takes a pointer to an instance of itself, and one that is called remove plugin that takes a pointer to an instance of itself. The server will not compile if you do not have the two of these, because we use them from a template method elsewhere. Because a plugin type needs to be able to handle, so if somebody registers 17 different error message handler plugin type here is the one that needs to know how to either use one and only one of them, or maybe it's going to fire error messages to all of them. That's sort of the responsibility of the type of plugin that it is, if that makes sense. And then this is actually an entry point for the rest of the server to call things. So the rest of the server will essentially, we've got a utility function to make this slightly shorter, but the rest of the server would essentially, if it wanted to use this, be doing Drizzle plugin error message vprintf, blah blah blah. Like that's how it would.
And this is how every place else in the code. If you have an error,
yeah, so you call that, and then it will send the message to one or more plugins that will handle the work of that, or it'll drop it on the floor if there are nothing implementing that. So you've got to not only provide you not only need to add what is the API that a plugin of this type needs to implement, but then how does the server call those things, right? What is the API for the server to use these plugins if you're adding a plugin type? Yeah, I don't really actually make that change. And then if we look in here, we'll see in this particular case, this plugin just makes a vector of error message pointers. So when you call that add plugin method, it's just going to add whatever that is into the vector. Removing it's just going to erase it from the vector. And when you call that vprintf entry point, it's going to loop over all of them and just fire the error message to every handler that's been registered.
Yeah, the error message one is kind of unusual. It breaks out of its own model a little bit. If there are no error message plugins, instead of doing nothing, it'll say it's got to go somewhere. It's going to standard error.
Yeah, because it's error messages. So just if the error is that you couldn't load your error message plugins.
That's exactly in fact why I got it in there. Is because how come this isn't work? I had to put that in there to debug the error message plugin handler.
Yeah. So. But it's also nice because it means that it's always at any point in the server, even before plugins have been registered, to call the error message handling subsystem of the server. So in this particular case, but so that's and even that right there, that's all the code that's required to add pluggable error messages, and then we just have to call. And so then because that one thing is a little bit long, Mark added a utility function that's just error message printf that on the back end calls, which normally we don't actually do this, but this is just fricking everywhere. So
well, part of it is because it was in the original MySQL code.
Yeah.
Is the function?
Oh right, yeah.
Printf.
Yeah. So this is part of.
And rather than submit a patch of 80,000 lines changing the name of the function.
Yeah. So this is that sort of, you see that it's just calling the vprintf thing. Some of the other ones, if you look for what's a good example? Logging does one of them.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see, like for instance in SQL parse, We call well this is actually the only place that those are called, but in SQL parse, we pass in, so in the parser, it's gonna call the logging, those two logging hooks that happen there. So if you're doing the logging plugin, so
Logging is pre-do as opposed to, because you want to hit the logger before a line executes and possibly again afterwards.
yeah, there's so that's the sort of generalized. Some of these are obviously more complicated. The storage engine plugin interfaces.
The most complicated.
This is quite complicated.
NoDB is the most complicated implementation of a plugin.
Yeah, or convoluted.
That too.
So that's sort of the general. Sorry, it's sort of a lot of information to cram into 45 minutes. In sort of rambling way. There's other things like and actually like this quick example. There's this query cache plugin type. It's not referenced anywhere in the server. We're not actually using it, but it's there, and it's got all of these hook points. So two things that need to be done are A,
Someone implement a plugin.
somebody implement a query cache plugin, and B, somebody actually stick calls to its entry points somewhere in the server so that the query cache plugin would get called by something.
This was our. There's actually one guy doing this. One of the crazy Japanese guys.
No, it was Toru.
Was it Toru
It
doing
was
this?
Toru doing that. Or no, was it?
I think it was one of his underlings. But yeah, his idea was to push the query cache and
Memcached. So all these, yeah. So there's sort of a two-edged. For the most part, writing plugins is mostly about implementing a plugin type that's already there. But it's also potentially.
If you want a new plugin, you also have to implement the other side of it into the server.
Yeah, of how the server's going to use that thing, or abstract, like there's already calls of things doing things, and sort of abstracting that into a plugin interface that then can have one or more implementations of is a pretty decent thing.
It's actually a kind of meta method we've done a fair amount. If there's some feature we want to yank out of Drizzle to make it simpler and smaller, if it's particularly a massive hair, it just gets yanked out entirely. If it's only minorly annoying to have it there, we tear it out and leave hook points where it was to call into a new plugin type.
Yeah. So I think we're at time actually. So that is what we've got. We're pretty much always on IRC. I'm always on. Well, okay, I'm not on IRC right now. But most of the time I'm on RC and perfectly happy to. So this is, if you look at mainline trunk right now, there's a few differences. They're not huge. Like for instance, because we've been looking at these, you'll notice down here that we've got an extra argument to this. Took it away because it was duplicated data. There's no need for the plugin to pass that in. We already know what it is. Thanks. It's just one more area where somebody could get it wrong. Adding that doesn't ever get you anything additional. The only thing it can do is break.
Well, it's surprisingly often, no, not surprising, in retrospect, not surprising how often someone would get that wrong because people would cut and paste their manifest out of another plugin.
Yeah.
And not change that.
So the little things that are different, you aren't likely to notice between trunk and this, but they make me happy. So once this gets pushed out, it'll be much cleaner. And also trunk is actually currently building all of the plugins.
So let's do a quick sweep down of all these plugins we have listed here. That's
storage engine, UDF, authentication. I
know that last time there was a talk about making a better directory structure for these. I take it that never happened.
No, it actually winds up being a little bit trickier than that. So there's no reason we support nested subdirectories. There's nothing.
There's sort of no standard or rhyme or reason here between a storage engine,
right?
You know, some
because
like
a
particular
module can implement a storage engine,
yeah.
And
it's all in ODB's fault.
Sure,
it's all in ODB's fault. Where do you stick it?
Well, on the other hand, it does make sense for different things to. Sophisticated plugins probably should implement a information schema plugin as well to describe themselves.
It's just that, I mean, I guess I don't know if there's any blueprints, but this will actually grow over time, and you'll get quite a lot of.
I myself had kind of a naming system that no one else stuck with. Logging off.
That's because you're a C guy. You like including the type of the thing in the name of the thing.
Yeah,
And
but you have
directories,
like,
yes.
you've got like Vim and UDF, for example, where a lot of those, you don't, doesn't need to have UDF in it.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, actually,
so-
I would sort of like for it not to have nobody to use the word UDF because there's like in the code land, those are functions. They're not UDFs. There's no actual code difference between a UDF and a non-UDF. They're just all functions, instances of functions. But yeah, but yeah, it could do that. The other thing that I should mention that is also in my branch that hasn't been pushed yet is all these plugins should now be able to be built outside of the tree. So this directory may not grow too terribly much longer because things like, you know, it might be maybe more simple for things like say PBXT to just be able to build and be like, hey, here it is, you know, rather than having to have a full Drizzle merge into the PBXT. It should be like, here's PBXT, and it just installs and it's happy. It may not, but it's a choice that can be made. So, and I, you know, that way things can have their own life cycles and stuff like that. So.
Some of the things that are interesting lately as plugins, like you see their multi-thread, our scheduler is a plugin now.
Schedules are plugins.
So single-threaded, multi-threaded event, or just event looped.
Yeah. Since
Cool
nobody else
threads
has come in
based.
here, I'd like to also point out this is I actually want to do something to this. This is what's Brian refers to this as a daemon plugin. It's not a plugin. I mean, it's a plugin, but it's not. There's no plugin object in here. It's just taking advantage of the fact that you call an init function, right? So in the init function, it's just running random code, which starts off some threads that do some things. Not stopping you. It's just function. So if you want,
So just have MySQL, or not, sorry, if you want to have Drizzle, if you want to do something that runs as a thread inside Drizzle,
yeah, just start it up in the init thing and then do whatever you want to do.